Einen wunderschönen guten Abend, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, get not distracted that I just started with Little German. It is back to the roots that I try to get our audience a bit disfocused, such as, am I in the right show? Yes, you are in the right show. We are in the CRM conversation. And yes, we started with our unbeatable sexy video and our introduction. And today we have a guest back in town, back in the studio, Phil Winters. And we are extremely happy to discuss with him in that ongoing approach a bit more about insights, about data, and how can we use data not only to tell us stories, but to, if we properly listen, get some more information out of it to serve customers and potentials better. Phil, how did it come that you were called the data whisperer?
Well, it started a very long time ago. As a matter of fact, when I was 17, I didn't like playing games because I thought games were boring, but I was fascinated even back then by data, and the only data was on an IBM mainframe. So I kind of finagled my way in and started working with computers. And over the years, I worked in the computing center as a college student and just absolutely loved everything having to do with data. The data whisperer came about actually after I got my official title, which was the father of customer intelligence. All that means is I'm old. But I had to somehow explain it to my
Father or
mother.
Godfather?
Yeah, the father.
The
Yeah.
father, okay.
Yeah,
Well, at least it's not grandfather.
exactly. And so what happened was with the data whisperer is it was very hard to explain to someone. And someone said to my mother, "Do you remember seeing the movie with the horse whisperer? Well, that's what Phil does with data." And she went, "Oh." So it's all down to my mom, and that's how that little data whisperer thing started. Just as in the movie, somehow I'm able to hear things from data that maybe some other people miss.
So she was going around saying, my son talks to things that don't talk back.
Exactly. He talks to data, but he's always been a geek, so it's okay. At least I know what he does now. I wasn't dealing in weird currencies or down the back trying to break slot machines or something like that. That would be a good one. We could talk about all of the someday. I'll come back and I'll talk about all the casinos I used to work for. That's interesting. That is very fascinating. But that's not the topic for today.
Oh well,
It could be.
maybe
It could be.
because
We've got a whole hour.
the work at the casino works only successfully if the data talks back, right?
Yeah, but there's things about casinos that are just fascinating. But we'll get there. But anyway, that's how I got into it. I then got very lucky and worked for at the time a small player, which became a very 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 big player in this space. I spent 25 years at SAS Institute, working all over the world. And when I first started, they were the only ones that could do this. Now, of course, there's lots and lots of ways of doing it. But at the time, it's just, as Malcolm Gladwell says, if you're young enough and get lucky enough to get the opportunity, you can develop some expertise pretty quickly. And I was just at the right place at the right time.
That's cool. And that's the magic in the game, such as that you did some serious work, no drugs or arms dealing, which is the dangerous part of life.
Different kind of serious.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, it is. If you see to one of these Netflix or Amazon channels where my kids sometimes look stories of people which are doing design of drugs and all that in a cellar and get rich and famous and get a lot of friends, and then
they say, "I want to be like that."
No. It is. I'm very lucky. My three boys all have gone in a very unspectacular direction, which I honestly like very, very much. And I can sleep at night and do not have too much visiting the state forces, police, anything like that. Coming back to data.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Coming back to data.
The role in Peppers and Rogers. You have been working with them quite closely, and from that time we know each other, that you did a lot of analyzing also in the aspects of the one-to-one methodology. And if we just go into technology and see that what is described in the one-to-one approach can now be done with a technology backup as hyper-personalization.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing was they were way ahead of their time in the ideas they came out with, but the technology and the platforms and things just weren't there. The funny thing is, I don't actually think in terms of software technology, I don't think there's actually anything new since about sometime in the 80s. But of course, what's happened is that the machine power has become so fast. I mean, I've got more compute power on my mobile phone that I had on my very first IBM mainframe. And also the sources of data, the way we're collecting data of source have just exploded, that the combination of these two things and some clever ways of putting software together means that you can now start doing some of the things that they talked about back then. But if you think of it, they were the visionaries that first set the ideas about what should be possible. And when you hear them talk, they were both just fantastic speakers, and all you could do was nod your head. And then over the and yeah, because it was so clear that when I first heard them, I thought, gosh, isn't this common sense? And everybody was going, no, it's not common sense. This is new. So over the years, what's happened, and I think that's why they asked me to join, was because I was able to start bringing in some of the data whisperer. My speciality has always been everything having to do with customer data, people data. So of course that fits in with the one-to-one marketing concepts really well. It's a bit of a shame that we have so many buzzwords, because it's sort of like Monty Python and the shoe, and now it's the tennis shoe, and soon we'll have the super sandal, because we're still talking about the same fundamental process. It's just the technology has gotten, in some cases, a lot better for doing it.
And quoting Monty
Python just doesn't work.
I follow the gourd myself.
Yes, follow the gourd. Yes, absolutely.
And the other thing is that from time to time, if we go for the killer rabbit, then the white killer rabbit is more or less, in that case, if your data gets spoiled, then the whole processes, how brilliant they are just a lot of shit. Yeah.
My first professor told me, remember, Phil, he made me do a graph. I think I wasn't even 18 yet. He made me do a graph. And I said, what data should I use? He says, it doesn't matter. The point is, when you make that graph and present it, there will be gullible people that believe whatever's on that graph. So be very, very, very careful that you understand what data you're taking in, how it's being transformed, and what you're doing with it, because there will be somebody out there that believes it. And we see that all the time today with all the fake news and things. But fake data is even more dangerous, because if you didn't understand real data to begin with, how do you understand the difference between what's fake data and what's a realistic way of doing it and what's not? It's one of my biggest topics right now, is trying to figure out how do you close the gap between business that has challenges, and we know they have the data, and all of this technology that can help you transform it into something that's useful. But before you start, make sure the two are actually in sync, because a lot of times the business will go, we want an apple, and and the other side will go, okay, well, we'll get you a machine learning platform that generates a deep learning models that will give you hyperparameter, and everybody's going, what?
Yeah,
We just want something that helps us figure out who's going to churn.
Can
it
we
sounds like a
replace
Rube
the word?
Goldberg device for opening a door. It's got
Sorry?
57. It sounds like Rube Goldberg, where you've got a machine that's got 57 different steps to open a door for you.
Yeah.
Can we just replace the word hyper with ultra?
Yeah. Whatever.
Hyper is so old, meanwhile. So
Yeah. Just whatever. Exactly. And that's my problem. I think, I mean, if we want to distract down a line about data, one of the things that I've learned is that every problem with data has the exact same series of steps. Yeah. It's always a very concrete series of 5 or 6 steps. Sometimes the steps are very straightforward. Sometimes the steps are very sophisticated. And that's when we get into a lot of the AI and deep learning and all that sort of stuff. But the steps you go from from let's define the problem, let's get the data, let's march through these very concrete steps and try to generate something that we didn't have before. That very basic, I mean, it's so basic, but everybody complicates it to a great extent, and that's where we start getting into trouble.
Is this also when you learn that the data is whispering back?
Yes.
How do you know that it's talking back to you, or that it's replying, answering?
Yep. It's not going to answer. What it's going to do is shout. And the question is, the data that you have originally cannot talk. And can you go through the steps to transform it into something that surfaces information? Let's face it. I'll tell you the secret of all these companies. In the end of the day, you only want to know a yes, no. You want to know a percentage. You want to know some sort of a forecast up or down probability over time, or some sort of grouping or clustering. That's it. All business problems can be broken down into those 4 categories. Now, sometimes it's quite complex. So when we say data talks to me, the first thing I have to do is figure out what is the business topic that we're trying to understand, trying to add some insight to maybe come up, because you need people in this. And man, we're going to talk about that, because without the people in it, it just doesn't work. But what steps are you going through, and what are you trying to do? And that's what I mean about the data actually screams at you. If you do it right, you always know that you're going to get the data. You've got to make sure that it's clean. You've got to pull it into an appropriate form. Then you do something to it, and that do something to it can be very straightforward, or it can be incredibly sophisticated. Then you have to get it into the right form so that it can be used. And it's always those same steps. It's always those same steps. And when people come and they start showing you code, and these Python programmers come and you get all of these people and they give you 47,000 lines of code, at the end of the day, that's still all they're doing. And I find it so amazing that we in business, we consultants, our job has to be to try to make it easier for people to understand this stuff, because there's still hard problems to solve. It's just the process, I think, is straightforward.
It is exactly what I just had as the flash. I do not know the proper word in English. I would describe it as to decomplicate it.
Yes.
Yeah. Make it less stressful. Make it easier to handle. Make it easily accessible.
I think the thing I've gone to is I try to teach people that what we're doing is we're flowing data. We're getting data and we're flowing it through steps, and it's a data flow. And at the end of the day, we will end up with new data coming out that helps us solve or that adds insight so we can solve our problem. A churn prediction score. What is that? Well, I know you guys know, but I'll just explain to everybody else in 1 minute. Basically, in all problems involving data, you always start with historical data, because machines aren't smart. I don't care what they say about artificial intelligence, machines aren't smart. You always start with past data. You know certain records were good and they renewed, and you knew that some records were not good because they churned. And what you do is you take that data and you start marching through that very straightforward process to come up with something that says, first off, do I understand who stayed and who left? And the second thing is, can I then start, before I know their final decision, can I start making a prediction, a percentage probability that these people are going to churn? That's all it is. And of course, the individual steps you go through can get quite sophisticated. I mean, when you look at someone like a Deutsche Telekom or the Bank of America or lots of people like that, I mean, they're doing really sophisticated churn stuff. But at the end of the day, the problem is still the same. It's always that series of steps that you go through.
Yeah. And this is somehow magic. Yeah.
Yeah. Arthur C. Clarke said, anything that you don't understand is magic. And I use that in my speeches all the time. And, yeah, you know, and he was famous for that. And for me, it's always a question, can I break it down? This is one of the reasons why I think my life has become easier over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Because you no longer have to spend 5 years learning to program before you can do this stuff. You can use other packages. They're called low code, they're called no code, but you're basically visually programming with this stuff. And you actually see on the screen those exact steps that I talked about. So you see the data flowing from one from one to the next. And it, so it just, in principle, it makes it much easier to sit down with somebody and explain the steps. And it doesn't have to be soupy complicated. I mean, sometimes it is, but my prediction is that if probably 75% of the things out there that create new insight to help you make decisions never touch machine learning. They're just transforming, consolidating, doing something to turn it into a form so that it's more useful. Of the other 25%, probably 23% of that is doing very straightforward decision trees and linear regression. That last 2% at the very, very, very end is where you get all these soupy-doopy buzzwords in there, like, you know, deep learning and all of these things. And yes, of course, there's theoretical cases where you can use it. But I think of one major telco that says, we can't do that sort of stuff on 30 million records. We got to keep it straightforward and come up with answers that we can generate on 30 million records in a couple of minutes. You know, we can't do that stuff that takes 48 hours. Anyway, I'm on a rant. You can tell.
It takes 48 hours once, right?
No, it actually doesn't. That's the problem, because one of the things that in the old school of using machine learning, what you did was you take your data and you split it into two. And one group of data you learn with some method, and then you take and you apply it to the rest of the data to test. Well, and that was the way they did it for years. And people would lock their models down for years and years at a time. The problem is the underlying data, the factors that are affecting that underlying data are changing so fast that you have to be able to relearn the model quite quickly. Whether the data is drifting, whether the models are drifting. In other words, they're changing more than the tolerance with which you have to get to the point where you can automatically do that stuff. Which is why, you know, in the old days, you're right, Thomas. You could run a model for 48 hours and it didn't matter because when it was done, it was good for 2 years.
Yeah, but even now you can in parallel retrain them.
Already, but at some point there are still limitations. The limitations usually have to do with I/O of the actual physical data. It's not the algorithms. But when you're trawling 30 million customer records that come from 8 different data sources that have a total of 1,000 different fields, and on each customer record you're going to generate even more fields of information to be used by your model. That's the crunch. The crunch is all of the volume of the data processing, and regrettably, that's still a bit of a problem. If you think of it, a bit of a sidetrack, that's exactly what SAP ended up doing with HANA, because there was so much data being hammered on, by moving all of this stuff up in the special HANA cloud in the beginning, et cetera, et cetera. They were trying to reduce that limitation on physically having to shuffle all the data around all the time. So this is not new, but it's still a major challenge when you get to a particular size.
Yeah. No, but back to the data whispering back. When do you know that it's whispering back and that it's not telling you BS?
Whispering or shouting, as
or
you said.
whispering, or whispering or shouting. This is where you absolutely have to have your domain experts. One of the interesting thing is, for many years, it was assumed that any well-trained data scientist, a data miner, can solve any problem. It's absolutely not true. The people who are the experts in their topic area, they may not know how to go through that process and do it, but they know their data. They know the sorts of things that are going to come out. If something comes out, they will be able to validate it pretty quickly. They will be able to say, that makes sense. Or they'll be able to say, if that's true, I know how to test it to make sure it makes sense. So that's where a lot of this A/B testing and a lot of A, B, C, D, E, F testing goes on. The data won't just scream perfectly to every person, but it usually screams to the domain expert. And that's why I said that back to that challenge of, can you get it into the right form so that the domain expert can do it? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges businesses have. As a matter of fact, it's a huge trend. Companies can't afford the specialists. There's just not enough of them out there. They make an absolute fortune. But can we take a domain expert who understands their data really well, and can we start giving them the skills beyond Excel and a BI tool and a CRM reporting system? But can we give them some tools to help them start being able to tackle some of these problems themselves and kind of upskill themselves? In my opinion, is in the last few years, that has become much more possible. Not because you send them to coding school for 10 years, but because there's just other ways of doing it.
Yeah, simpler, easier, easy to learn, easy to access, easy to use.
Yeah, and that still doesn't mean you're an expert, but if you've got a domain expert doing the data and then doing the interpretation, you're much more likely to have something sensible at the end of the day. So how do you get your domain experts upskilled? How do you get these people working with the real experts better? I mean, in the CRM space, it's the exact same thing. CRM and marketing automation, a lot of these things, there's been people who know how to use these tools, and they kind of know their data really well. But when they want to start generating something new, they still have to go to someone else or pray that the CRM vendor's given them an AI tool that magically figures out what they want to. You can tell I'm a little about that one. But, that magically tell them what they want to know, or they have to be trained so that they can learn to do a little bit of themselves.
Why not going the other way around, enabling the data or the information that comes out of it at the end of the funnel, let's call it a funnel, explain itself?
Very, very difficult because of context. It's almost impossible without context. I'll give you a great example. Let's take the number 42. What could that mean? Somebody has to know context. I mean, it could be the answer to the universe. It could be a hotel number. It could be a category. It could be a product name. It could be an age. Oh, let's assume it's an age. Is it a good age or a bad age? Well, it depends. I mean, if it's an age of, adults, it's good. But if we're only looking at children, then 42 is probably not a good number in there, and we'd want to go check it out. And you can only do that from domain expertise. The human brain is still so much faster at understanding that there has been some work done to try to do this automatic stuff, but it's not even baby steps. It's wiggle little toe territory when it comes to what people do.
Okay, now the kids don't know Douglas Adams.
Exactly.
They don't know the meaning of 42. But still, this whole funnel these 5-6 steps are normally executed in a context.
Correct. And
That
that's why I was
should-
saying at the
that
beginning.
should
So before
facilitate
you
the
start,
explanation.
you can't give the explanation. You can put it in the right form
Yeah.
so that it is usable. But it can't necessarily go and say, because there's all sorts of ways to interpret it. But you're absolutely right that if you design the process correctly, you end up with data that is in a right form. It might be a new column of information. It might be in a graphical form. It might be in a tabular form. It might be a new label. It can be all sorts of things, but it's going to end up in a form that for the domain expert in that area, it means something. I'll give you the best example at the moment is all the CRM vendors are talking about, AI and we will generate. Well, first off, is it AI? No. Most of them are doing some sort of advanced rules engines where what they're doing is they're saying if certain things happen, then we're going to flag a record with a certain meaning. And that's okay. That can be incredibly helpful. We can show you the fact that they've just hit our website 20 times and they've downloaded 5 things and they've done this and this and that. That's really, really helpful. But they can't say buy or not buy. All they can do is generate that extra piece of information. And only over time can they start actually using machine learning. I don't know. Most of the CRM vendors I do, although they say they've got AI products, they're actually not doing machine learning for the most part. The reason is you have to have historical data. You have to have the data of who churned, who didn't, who bought, who didn't. And over time you can build that up, but out of the box, that sort of stuff doesn't exist. And anybody that tells you you can take, an industry template and apply it to your business is talking rubbish, because each one of us has a slight secret sauce of how we're running our business, and we need to take care of that in that process. So I think a lot of what you're talking about is really good, but for example, in the case of CRM, you still need the human in there. You still need to go through that process and generate the data. And a human still has to make the decision. Is this good? Is it bad? And it might actually make some more questions. We've got to go back and check again and maybe do some further investigation.
Which is quite bad news for all those companies that are thinking that they just throw a little technology at a problem and for people because they are no more needed.
Yeah, I'm afraid that is still one of the big problems. People still are looking for silver bullets, and I think we can give them some things that help a lot, but it's not let's unpack it and just plug it in and it'll solve all our problems and I can go home.
Yeah, technology seems to be good for quantitative analysis. You still are always going to need a person for qualitative analysis. Here are your numbers.
Yeah.
What do they mean?
Exactly.
People will tell you what they mean.
Yeah.
That is exactly the source where I wanted, by the title of the today's show, how we can create some guidance, and we can touch at least marketing, sales, and service to give them some hints in how to do, with the help of the machines, either a guidance or a proper interpretation, or to get them the opportunity to get back into the loop. When is the timing to get the human back into the loop?
Yeah. I think the first thing, and Ralph knows this because he and I, are certified in the same sort of orientation to this. The very first thing we've got to do is we've got to get the companies to understand that they must look at their data in terms of the customer's perspective. It doesn't matter what their percentage probability is. They have to know the needs of the customer. They have to know the behavior of the customer. They have to take all of that data, and it's not rocket science. It's something that you do. You go through and you say, how could this data be used? We have a record. We know that somebody called our call center 5 times. Well, What does that mean? Well, that has something to do with the behavior of the person. Where did they call us? Was it in an information gathering phase? Was it in a post-purchase phase? And the more we can break that information down, the better we can start saying, okay, what data do we have and how can we use it? That's the number one thing is we most of us have tons of data. It's just we have no idea what it might mean. And so going through this process of saying, a customer is going to make a decision for us and live with that decision, hopefully for a very, very long time. When we have contact with them, when we're collecting data about them, what do we have at the different points? Sometimes we have a lot, sometimes we have very little. And by the way, this is all GDPR conform, so there's no problem with any of that. And if you do it correctly. And so then you can pull that together and then you can start getting some hints. So Alf, back to your point about how do we start giving insights? The first thing is to sit down and try to understand, well, what data could give us insight about things? Then you can start going through and doing, start off by doing very, very straightforward things. For example, let's say we have a marketing automation system and we have our website and it's all set up properly and we have our CRM system and we can actually, excuse me, gather lots of information about an individual and we start summarizing it. We know that this individual was looking at these sorts of things. So we know that they're learning, they're not ready to buy, they're learning. We know that they actually downloaded a whole bunch of stuff about this, this, and this. That's a good indication. And then you can start going in and making I'm going to call them rules engines. The CRM vendors like to call it AI, but let's just call it rules engines that consolidate that information to give you, for a particular person, information about, how often has they been with us? What are the top 3 topics they seem to have been looking at? Is there anything that we have to flag as being a real problem? So, we were talking earlier about people that shout because they've got a problem. You got to be able to jump on that stuff really, really quickly. But you can consolidate that, and already you're giving a little bit of guidance because you've got all of those, let's say, 50 points of light consolidated into 2 or 3 columns of extra information about the individual. And that's the first step in guidance. The second step then is over time, either because somebody smart in sales and marketing sits down and just kind of, does a feel, or maybe over time you actually do have enough data that you can see which ones are working. You can start flagging those above a particular, say, score or combination of things that might be to the point that they're ready to be talked to or have some sort of another approach, et cetera, et cetera. And that can be totally automated. But once again, it takes the expert and someone who knows how to take that data and pull it together in a different way. Is that making sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. That's why we got you here.
Hey, if we knew everything, then we wouldn't need to ask the experts, right?
And as you can tell,
I just jumped in again on the get the human back into the loop. I believe that during COVID and pandemia, if it's called off or if it's still there, that there is the moment we learned about empathy, we learned about that people are working under different environmental challenges and under working condition challenges.
Yeah.
Now, guidance is helpful. And what are your experiences lately with these examples where Corona hit the fan?
Well, there's a couple of things. First off, anybody who had models in place, in other words, they were working on past historical data, the models didn't work anymore. Now, here's the fascinating point about it. If you think of software development and you think of a production system like a CRM system, a vendor will go through and build a CRM system and lock it down, and it will go through Q&A, and then the customer gets access to the production CRM system. And that might be in the cloud, it might be on-prem, doesn't matter. It's a kind of a locked down thing. And it works, or maybe it doesn't. But when you're talking about a system that contains a model, you're talking about the same software process. But what's fascinating is the software is still working. The model is still working. But because the underlying data has changed and all of the things underneath the covers have changed, it's spitting out bad numbers. So if you're an operations person sitting there going, well, the application shows 100% availability and it's all the parameters are good. But because the data changed, it's now spitting out bad data. So that's why it's become so important to start using extra mechanisms in there to try to figure out when is it that something started going off what we expected. And that could be automated, so it could be something where, hang on, we always expect, the bell curve of the data we're getting to kind of fit in here, or we kind of expect our predictions, because to be honest, we won't know whether our predictions are right for, weeks or months into the future, but we can see that the curve of our predictions seem to be shifting. We're rejecting a lot more than we used to. That's the sort of thing where you want to automatically flag it and say, hey, go back to your experts, run it through on newer data. Let's see if we need to retrain the model. And of course, the smart organizations are doing that automated. And Thomas, that's what you were saying before. Can't you do that automated? You can. It's just at some point, there's probably a degree of return where the level of sophistication gets so high. If I can get a machine, if I can get a deep learning that gets me 0.79, but it takes me 48 hours every time, or I can do a decision tree and get 0.78, and I can do it in 1 second or a sub-second every time. Maybe it's a good idea to do that one instead. So that's what I mean. It's a lot of balancing going on. But that's the thing. That's the thing about some of these topics.
Better fast and nearly as good as for the long-term run, but serve the customer or decide more fast, more quickly, more experience driving in a positive way, such as pain relieving. If somebody is in a situation, he wants his problem sorted, he doesn't want the 200% highly sophisticated solution in 5 days. He wants it now.
And I think one of the challenge, and let's go back to the CRM space, because this is a great one. I'm focusing a lot at the moment on a huge topic called lead nurturing. And if you think of the lead nurturing, what do we mean by that? First off, I hate the word lead. I've never met anybody who went home and said to their spouse, honey, I identified myself today as a lead. We don't do it. We just don't do it. But let's just call it. So these are individuals that we legally have contact with, and there's been things happening. If you think of the way the world works at the moment in the CRM space, over there on the marketing automation side, that's where we're gathering all the facts about how many times have they hit the website, and we're gathering it all in, and we're doing little campaigns, and we're doing this, that, and the other. We're gathering all this information, and we're popping up with a score that says, call this person, and we shoot it over into our CRM system, and it appears on some young bright spark's desk, and it's not quite as bad as cold calling, but it's sort of cool calling. So, then they have to. And then I think to myself, hang on, there's no human in the loop there. We can go through this process of gathering all of this stuff, but how about we do something a bit more clever? Because as soon as we take them out of the nurturing, dump them over into the CRM, turn them into try to turn them into an opportunity, and it's not a real opportunity and it goes away, or we cancel them out or whatever, we've kind of lost the nurturing aspect. So how about using all this technology, using our marketing automation, using our CRM, using some good technology to pull the data together, to surface it in a way that instead of sending it straight to a salesperson, you send the high probability ones to an individual, and they reach out to the person. The first thing they do is they look at the screen and they say, based on all the stuff that they've done, I can see the summary here. I'm human. I'm the one that's got the qualitative. I'm the one that can say, that looks easy. Maybe they don't even have to reach out to the person, but we could give them 3 different choices. Number one, they could say, yeah, the guy's downloaded an awful lot of stuff, but I can't see a clear selling potential in here. Let's pop them back to nurturing with a flag to say, hey, keep nurturing them. The second one might be, they look like it. Let me reach out, and before I start sell, let me just go out and see if they'll answer a question or two, and maybe based on that, I can make a determination of, is this something we should be picking up, or is it something that once again should go back into the nurturing? Or the third thing is, yeah, it's clearly somebody we need to reach out to and talk to, in which case it is a real lead in the CRM system. But that human in the loop, making sure that we've gathered all the data, surfaced it to them, of course, giving them some guidelines saying, hey, I'm not giving you all 10,000 individuals where we've got information. I'm only giving you the top 100. Yeah, because I've at least got it down to the 100. Now, you do your stuff and go through and figure out which ones might be real potential, which ones you want to actually reach out and contact and maybe try to clarify a little bit, or which ones are clearly ones that go back into the lead nurturing. And that is something that can be automated. But for me, that's a great example of human in the loop in the CRM space. And I don't see an awful lot of companies doing that because the technologies they don't make it easy.
Of course they don't, because it's detrimental to their objectives.
What objectives?
Having it automated means cutting the human out of the loop. Have the machine do it.
Yeah. I don't think so. I don't think we're cutting the human out of the loop. I think what we're doing is we're using the humans a lot more smarter.
That would be my idea of how to do it. But if a vendor is driving his, I'm brilliant, I automate it, I cut down people, and I bring more automation, you pay me instead of the humans, and I'm cheaper, then we have less.
Better.
Yeah, that's a lovely dream to buy into, and it doesn't work. I'm sorry, it doesn't work, because it's been proven over and over and over that anytime you touch data, you have to at some point have a human in the loop to make those sorts of decisions. Otherwise, will it work? Possibly it could work. Will it be efficient? And will it be something that your ultimate customer actually appreciates? That's where I question it.
Is the experience the one you had in mind? Because in these days, automation versus empathy is a big question mark I would like to hang into the room. And I would say you gave us in the prep call a little hint, such as, what is a payment system worth when it has automation and 20 call center agents, and you have a problem and 18 are in the sick bay?
Yeah. And that was interesting. This was a case where it's a major payment provider for the regional transportation companies. You can go with your app, and it gets charged to your credit card. And when something goes wrong, you've got to get in touch with this credit card company. And that happened to me, and so I had to call up. And the interesting thing was the message when you call was very, very clear. It's going to be a while, because just like the rest of you in the world, we are all slammed by COVID. And please, wait or send us an email. Here's the email, please. But it's going to be a while, because we're reduced from 20 people down to 2. And so it could be a while. But that's okay, because they were upfront. They didn't leave you on the line saying, "Oh, the bloody stupid company, put us on call, wait for hours and never talk to us." They told us what the situation was. They told us that it was going to take a while, and they gave you some options, which I think was quite clever. That's just trying to make it a little clearer that in some cases, like in today's situation with the COVID thing, we're in some weird situations, and we need to tell people that.
Make them aware. It is not bad behavior. It is simply, we are désolé. Yeah. like the French would say. And that sounds so warm and friendly, such as we would love to do better.
Yeah.
But we are out of
we are too screwed.
Only got
exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, this goes back to my human in the loop example as well. You go out to somebody and say, hey, you gave us permission. We know you've been doing an awful lot of stuff. Is there something I can help you with? Here, or here, let me know. And it really is a personal email. It's not a totally, a totally automated thing. And that based on that input, the person on our side is actually making the decision of what part of the automated system to put this person back into. Do we put them back into lead gen, or do we put them, or do we explore a little further? Is this something, or is it nurturing? I mean, what is it? And I think that sort of thing's really, really helpful.
And having that information allows you to be proactive.
Exactly.
And everyone's talking proactive lately. I just came out of the beginning of a 3-day virtual conference about proactive support. So it's on my mind.
Yeah. And proactive's another thing. We've been able, I think for me, when it comes to data, probably the biggest new treasure trove of data for me is everything having to do with text and by extension voice. Yeah. That has become so powerful and so straightforward in the process, because to be honest, processing voice data and processing text data is the exact same steps. It's just the very first step of where you're transforming it into something sensible is more sophisticated, but it's the same thing. And the insights where you can, if somebody's angry, you can pick up on those words and immediately make some decision to surface it to a human who can then make a decision. Is this real or not? People that are happy, people that are frustrated, people, and the point is, it's from those text things that you get an indication as to what area they're in and what you need to do to help them. So for me, I think the biggest trove of data that helps me understand needs and also at times behavior, where someone is in the process, is text and by extension voice data. Because voice data is the same thing. It just has to go through an extra process before you change it into the tasks. Then you go through and transform it again.
Yeah.
And this from perspective, because two things are running on my mind. The one thing is what drove you really to ecstasy, such as the book of They Ask You Answer, and what is behind that concept. And the other thing is, how do we, with the knowledge we have, the technology we have our hands, and the human in the loop smarter nurturing process, how do we prevent churn effectively?
Yeah. Well, let's start with the basic one.
Please.
Do we even have an understanding in our data of what churn is? That's the first thing. It can't be rumors or stories or salespeople down in the pub talking about it. Do we have data where we can absolutely say in the past, I mean, maybe 97% of our customers renewed, but we know the 3% that didn't, because that's the most important thing. And based on that, then you can build up all of these different things going through the process. I sometimes find I worked with a company in Turkey. I can't remember where I talked to you guys about this. It was a collections agency, and they actually had a huge percentage of payouts. It was almost 50%. And I mean, when a collection agency buys bad loans, they're expecting to get like 2% or 3% or 5% if they're lucky, and they were up in the 40s. And what they did was they started talking and interviewing these people much differently and gathering information, gathering language, gathering how did they talk? How were they affected? How was their surroundings, et cetera, et cetera. And they came up with some pretty interesting findings that allowed them to very quickly say which people really do want to pay. They're just in a shit situation and can't. But because of their background, their family, their culture, their way of going about things, et cetera, they really want to. And do they actually have a family or friends infrastructure that might help them get there? Let's identify those people as quickly as possible, because if we got 100 deadbeat loans, all 100 of those people are not deadbeats. So let's see if we can go through and use that data to try to figure out much more quickly who is it who really, really, it's a matter of pride to figure out a way out of this, rather than just saying, oh, well, I'll just declare bankruptcy. Who cares?
I have to just make the transformation in my head, such as I was in collecting items and not in collecting money, such as incasso versus a fan community collecting little figures and that. So apologize.
Collecting on all, but if you think of it, it's the same thing. I mean, when people are very straightforward, each one of the four of us will have different needs. There'll be a different priority of things that are important to us, but they could be defined, and they could be defined through the sorts of information we collect about it. So we know Alf would like little figurines, and Phil just wants more data. So, if you want to make Phil happy, just give him more data. It doesn't matter what it is, just give him more data. You know what I mean? So all of these things are the same, in my opinion. It always boils down to the same series of steps. I know that's...
You'll get an NFT.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's in that magic? Sorry, Marshall. You first.
No, I was just mumbling.
You had that Arthur C. Clarke quote, which was quite impressive to me, as I learned a lot from you. But if you don't want to share it, I keep shut.
Oh, no, Marshall, go ahead and read it, because you've got it down there properly. What Clarke said.
Yeah, well, it's one of my favorites. I memorized it a long time ago. It's, I believe, Clarke's second law. And that is, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Which is a more wordy way of saying what you did.
Exactly. And you're absolutely right. And that's my problem with some of the vendors. They keep trying to make it magic, and it's not. And as a matter of fact, it's not usually even that advanced technology. Funny thing is, somebody said to me, Phil, when was the last time something really new came on the market for machine learning? And I didn't know, and I had to go ask some experts, and they went, 1980s, 80s. I think GBoost was the last really kind of thing, and it came out in the late 80s. So they were going, I said, well, what about all of this deep learning? They said, nah, that's been around since the 50s. We can just do it faster now.
Were neural networks?
Sorry?
When were neural networks established? I thought that was 50s. In the early 90s. 50s.
No, 50s. The first papers were in the 50s. I know that because my I'm gonna show my geek credentials. My dad used to work on it, and I don't think I was even. I was really little. I was like 12 years old, and he tried to explain this stuff to me. And it had been around for a while. Now, you're right, Thomas. There's been some enhancements to it, but the basic philosophies and things have been around for a very, very long time.
They didn't really make it into university until the early 90s. So when they taught me about AI, this was expert systems, and they were rule-based. Which is
exactly. And and for me, all of these little things, all of these methods, they're just different tools in the box. You still have to go through all the rest of the steps the same way. Sometimes you use one tool, sometimes you use another, a method. But I'm a simple guy. I like using things that I can explain afterwards. There's a new trend in the industry called explainable AI, where you take the output of a deep learning exercise, which just by the nature of how the math works, a human cannot go down to that level and understand it. But then you do something afterwards to make it explainable. And basically what they're doing is they're running a decision tree on this thing and saying, oh, well, guess what, guys? If we could do it with a decision tree to begin with, we would have done it with a decision tree. That's just kind of surfacing over what really happened. So I'm a bit skeptical about some of this. Oh, we're going to use XAI techniques to explain to business why this is. Yeah, I'd rather use a very simple decision tree or linear regression, because I can explain that to anybody.
I can explain that right away.
Yeah.
Which originally was one of the problems of deep learning models, right? So they are magic.
Yeah, and it is. And I mean, if you got a PhD in it, you can understand it. But other than that, so I agree. Okay, onward. Rolf, you had something.
Simply the magic, not magic, but the empathy touch of they ask, you answer, such as a bot could answer the questions, a human could answer the questions, a sophisticated rule-based system could answer questions. Help me to understand why that was a real trigger for you, that book. And
I think I've been a promoter of this concept of understand the customer for a long time, and Ralph, I know you follow that too. So I've always said you have to understand it. A customer, we do not sell, a customer buys, and we have to understand. And in each one of those steps, a customer is reaching out to us or to the world around them to gather certain information, to do certain things so that they can come to a conclusion, so that they can keep moving forward. What I liked about the ask and you answer was the fact that it's basically, first off, it's an extension on my book, Customer Impact, because I give you the perspective, and then this book has a lot of different examples of how you might want to interact from the customer's perspective. And I think that's one of the key things. You can't force this stuff down people's throats. You have to be there with the right place, with the right time, with the right message. And the point is, you can't just buy a piece of software and turn it on. You have to constantly be looking at that data and saying, is this working? Are we getting the resonance? Are we getting feedback that this is empathy, that hey, these people understand me. They're getting me what I want in a way I want it. And what's good about the book is there's just lots of examples in there, that a lot of which are newer than when I wrote my book a number of years ago. So for me, it's another group of techniques to use as we're trying to understand. And I don't think it's everything. I think there's even more out there, but it gives us that basis.
It's a new impulse, such as
exactly. That's why it's this.
Perhaps it's time for a new book.
I've thought about it. There's a challenge in that I'm a bit of a dyslexic, so which is why I like to talk, and I'd have to do quite a bit of work with my ACE cohort in crime. But one of the things I've thought about is a series of articles that try to put a lot more of these practical things together, put a lot more practical things about when should the human be in there, and give a few case studies and a couple of ideas. What can you automate, and at what point does a human actually have to look at it? And just trying to get people going on this journey. Or the big one, how do you get these teams actually working together? Because there's still too many companies that the data science geeks are in one corner, and everybody trying to run the business sensibly is in another corner, and there's still an awful lot of, not working together properly. So don't know. I'll think about it.
Hey, it works for me. I mean, they used to publish books one chapter at a time in newspapers.
The man there. He is our famous writer in Cascade. The man there is the straightforward journalist with writer experience.
Yeah.
Me, I try my very best, I'm something in between lazy and trustful of language recognition systems, which always make me feel bad, such as they are not... I'm not using them appropriate, or they do not understand me right. So, and I'm not talking in dialect to them.
Yeah.
So,
I think for me, it's all about. Yeah, for me, it's all about. I don't think there's actually a lot that's totally new. So I'm trying to avoid all the buzzwords out there. And I'm sort of saying to myself, is there a series of things that would be interesting to people if explained in a straightforward, clear way, that might be useful to help keep them moving forward in all of this, you know? So I'm still thinking about it. Let's put it that way.
You just said why your book will not be sold.
Of course, it's too practical.
No buzzwords.
No buzzwords.
No
buzzwords.
I know torpedoing buzzwords is also worthwhile.
That's
so
true.
If you can write a book that just tears them all apart and says we've been doing the same shit for 30 years.
Yeah, but people don't like old people don't like old people like that saying, "Oh, we've been doing that for 35 years. Why would you want to do anything different?" Somehow I have to figure out a new style of how to present that.
If you take that style of language and give a voice or a CD to listen to, or an MP4 file or something like that, and with that saying, that would be marvelous. And the other thing is, what I am missing is what I found out is more about the style like Kotler is or was writing a lot of his books. It was like reading a novel, but a good to read novel. Easy to access, getting samples, getting inspirations out of good examples. This is what makes me tick these days. If I find books which are explaining in an easy language complicated things, such as where we started in our convo with decomplicating. And
that's an interesting point. I'm going to ask for just a final 2 minutes. The reason is I'm about to choke. If I stay on much longer, it's not going to be very pleasant.
Wrap it up.
Yeah,
let's wrap it up.
Go for it.
Yeah. It's always a pleasure for me to work with you guys. I mean, this is always fun. We always get conversations going. I have no idea whether we talked about everything we wanted to, but I've at least come up with 2 or 3 more topics. I'd love to go into more details. Maybe another time. It's always fun.
So you answered your question. We didn't. So we need to repeat version 3.
You're always welcome.
No problem. It's my pleasure. It's a lot of fun. But I am going to go because I am just about to choke myself here.
So. We don't want that. We don't want
and
that.
We appreciate very much that even that you caught the bug, you are with us tonight, and that you have exceeded now all your drinks, which keep you working, and the water. And we know that disaster area, if one of our colleagues is out of coffee, that's getting in danger.
No, this is the famous tea. By the way, this is my wife's cup, not mine, just so you know.
Well, I guessed so.
But I do have COVID, and I'm about to start choking, so I do need to go. But it's been a real pleasure. I always have fun with you guys.
Thank you very much that you were with us. Thanks for the audience staying with us so long and so vividly and listening, as even that we have not so many comments these times. I guess as some are hidden, I'll come later. It will be interesting to continue the conversation and find some topics where we get the little teasers from the audience where to continue our conversation.
Right. That'd be great. Okay. Take care, everybody.
Take care. See you.